The Galactic Confederation had ruled the stars for 12,000 years before they found Earth. They had conquered 1,000 worlds. They had brought 500 species under their control. They believed they understood everything about life in the universe. They were wrong. Ambassador Al was a senior diplomat of the I-Dominion. He was old by his people's standards and had seen many new species join the Confederation. Some joined peacefully. Others required persuasion. A few required force. But all of them eventually understood their place in the galactic order. When the first reports about humanity arrived on his desk, Al read them with growing disbelief. The reports described a species that had evolved on what the Confederation classified as a Category 7 death planet. This classification was reserved for worlds so hostile that no intelligent life should be able to survive there. Earth had active volcanoes that could destroy entire regions. It had massive storms that swept across continents. It had predators in every environment from the deepest oceans to the highest mountains. The planet's single sun bombarded the surface with radiation that should have caused constant genetic damage. The temperature varied so wildly that water could exist as solid ice in some places and boiling steam in others. And yet humans had not only survived on this world, they had thrived. They had built cities and nations. They had developed technology and art. They had looked up at the stars and dreamed of reaching them. Al dismissed the reports as exaggerated. His assistant had probably made errors in the translation. No species could be this resilient. The first contact team arrived on Earth 3 months later. They landed their silver ship in a field outside a human city and waited for the natives to approach. The Confederation had done this hundreds of times before. The pattern was always the same. The primitive species would be frightened at first. Then they would be awed. Then they would submit to the clearly superior civilization that had come to guide them. Humans did not follow the pattern. Commander Jake was among the first to approach the alien vessel. He was a tall man with steady hands and calm eyes. He had served in the United Earth Navy for 20 years. He had seen combat. He had lost friends. He had learned that the universe was rarely kind to those who showed weakness. When the aliens emerged from their ship, Jake did not fall to his knees in awe. He did not run away in terror. He simply walked forward and extended his hand in greeting. The aliens did not understand the gesture. In their culture, exposing an empty hand was a sign of surrender. They recorded in their reports that the first human they met had immediately submitted to their authority. This was their second mistake. 200 human delegates traveled to the Galactic Council to formalize first contact. They sat in a vast chamber surrounded by representatives of dozens of species. The ceiling was so high it disappeared into darkness. The walls were covered with symbols representing 10,000 years of Confederation history. The council chairman rose to speak. He was an ancient eye with 4 eyes and skin like polished stone. His voice echoed through the chamber as he announced the council's decision. Humanity would be granted protected species status. This was a great honor, he explained. Humans would be confined to their solar system for their own safety. Confederation observers would monitor their development. In a few thousand years, if they proved themselves worthy, they might be allowed to join galactic society. Jake stood among the human delegates. He listened to every word. He smiled politely and nodded at the appropriate moments. And when the ceremony was over, he returned to Earth without protest. The council believed they had solved the human problem before it began. They had contained a primitive species on their primitive world. The matter was settled. 6 months later, the first human ship jumped into Confederation space using a drive that should have taken them centuries to develop. The Confederation had given humanity access to basic information about jump technology as part of the Protected Species Agreement. They expected humans to study it for generations before understanding even the fundamental principles. Human engineers had reverse-engineered the technology in weeks. Human scientists had improved upon it in months. Human pilots were now flying ships that could outrun anything in the Confederation fleet. The Council sent a diplomatic warning. They explained that humans were violating the terms of their protected status. They demanded that all human vessels return to the Sol system immediately. The humans ignored them. Admiral Eth was given command of a fleet of 50 warships. His orders were simple: travel to the human colony on 442b and demonstrate the consequences of defying the Confederation. He was not expected to destroy the colony. A show of force would be sufficient. Primitive species always surrendered when they saw real power. Eth arrived at 442b with his fleet in perfect formation. The human colony below was small, a few thousand settlers living in prefabricated buildings. They had no warships. They had no planetary defenses. They had nothing but farming equipment and mining tools. Eth broadcast his demands: surrender immediately or face the consequences. The colony went dark. All communication ceased. All visible activity stopped. Eth smiled. The humans were afraid. They were hiding. Soon they would emerge with their hands raised, begging for mercy like every other species before them. He ordered his ships to fire a warning volley. Energy beams streaked down from orbit and struck the ground around the colony. The message was clear: surrender or die. 3 hours later, Eth was no longer smiling. The colonists had not been hiding in fear. They had been preparing. When Eth's Marines landed to accept the expected surrender, they found empty buildings. The humans had moved underground into tunnels that had not appeared on any Confederation scans. And then the humans attacked. They came out of the ground like ghosts. They carried weapons made from mining lasers and industrial cutting tools. They fought with a ferocity that Eth had never witnessed in any species. His Marines, trained for ceremonial duties rather than actual combat, fell by the dozens. Above the planet, civilian transport ships rose from hidden launch sites. They were not warships. They had no weapons, but their pilots flew them directly into Eth's cruisers. One after another, human civilians sacrificed themselves to damage the Confederation fleet. A woman named piloted a cargo hauler toward the flagship. Her ship was small and slow and completely defenseless. Any gunner could have destroyed her with a single shot, but she flew through the chaos of battle, dodging debris and weapons fire, until she reached the flagship's engine section. She broadcast a single message on all frequencies before impact. Her voice was calm and steady. She said only 5 words: "You should have stayed home." The explosion tore through the flagship's engineering deck. Eth survived by pure chance. He was on the bridge when the ship lost power. He watched through as his fleet burned around him. He counted 32 ships destroyed before rescue vessels arrived to pull him from the wreckage. He returned to the Council with fewer than 20 ships remaining. His report was brief. The humans had not surrendered. The humans had fought. The humans had won. The Council convened an emergency session. The I representative proposed immediate and total extermination of the human species before they could spread further into the galaxy. The threat was too great. The risk was too high. Humanity had to be eliminated. The motion passed without a single vote of opposition. Every member of the Council believed they were making the right decision. They believed that overwhelming force would solve the human problem once and for all. They believed that no primitive species could stand against the full might of the Galactic Confederation. They did not yet understand what they had done. They did not realize that they had just made the worst mistake in their 12,000-year history. They did not know that humanity was not a problem to be solved. Humanity was a force that could not be stopped. And the galaxy was about to learn why. The Galactic Confederation believed in efficiency. They had ruled the stars for 12,000 years by finding the simplest solution to every problem. When they decided to exterminate humanity, they chose the most efficient method available. They would not waste ships and soldiers on a prolonged war. they would use biology. The Confederation's greatest scientists gathered in a secret facility on a moon orbiting a dead world. They studied human DNA samples collected during first contact. They analyzed human physiology and identified weaknesses. They designed a pathogen that would target only humans. No other species would be affected. The plague would spread through the air and water. It would kill quickly and leave no survivors. They called it Agent Omega. They believed it would end the human problem within a single year. The pathogen was released simultaneously on 17 human colonies. Transport ships carried infected cargo containers. Diplomatic vessels spread contaminated materials. Within days, humans began to die. Humanity called it the Gray Plague because of the color victims turned before death. The disease attacked the nervous system first. Victims lost feeling in their hands and feet. Then they lost the ability to walk. Then they lost the ability to breathe. Death came within 72 hours of infection. 30 million humans died in the first wave. The Confederation monitored the spread of the plague from a safe distance. Their scientists predicted total extinction within 6 months. The remaining human population would be too weak to resist. The few survivors would be easy to eliminate through conventional means. The problem was nearly solved. And then something happened that the Confederation had never seen before. Doctor was a geneticist working in an underground laboratory on Mars. He was 43 years old with tired eyes and steady hands. He had spent his career studying diseases that no one else wanted to touch. When the Gray Plague reached Mars, he did not evacuate with the other civilians. He stayed in his laboratory and began to work. Did not sleep for the first 48 hours. He ran blood samples through every analyzer he had. He studied the pathogen's structure under microscopes that could see individual molecules. He compared it to every known disease in human history. By the end of the second day, he understood what the Confederation had created. It was elegant in its cruelty. The pathogen had been designed to evolve faster than human immune systems could adapt. Every time the body developed antibodies, the plague would change and attack from a new angle. But notice something the Confederation scientists had missed. The pathogen needed a specific protein to reproduce. Without that protein, it could not spread within the body. Human cells produced this protein naturally, but there was a way to block its production. Called his team together. There were only 6 of them left. The others had fled or died. He explained his theory and showed them the data. He told them they had 4 days before the second wave of the plague swept through human space. 4 days to develop a treatment that would save their species. They did not ask if it was possible. They simply began to work. For 6 days they lived in the laboratory. They ate protein bars and drank cold coffee. They ran simulations and tested compounds. They failed hundreds of times, but each failure brought them closer to understanding. Each mistake taught them something new. On the 5th day, a researcher named Lisa Park found the answer. She had been testing a combination of antiviral compounds when she noticed an unusual reaction. The pathogen stopped reproducing. It did not die, but it could no longer spread. The human immune system could handle the rest. They synthesized the first batch of the counteragent within hours. They tested it on infected volunteers who had accepted that they were going to die. Within 12 hours, the volunteers were showing signs of recovery. Broadcast the formula to every human colony on an open channel. He did not care if the Confederation intercepted it. Speed mattered more than secrecy. Human scientists across settled space began producing the counteragent in every laboratory they could find. By the time the second wave of the Gray Plague should have swept through humanity, 80% of the population had been treated. The plague did not disappear, but it was no longer a death sentence. Humans had turned extinction into a chronic condition that could be managed and survived. The Confederation scientists were stunned. Their models had predicted human extinction. They had not accounted for a species that could develop a counteragent in less than a week. Their own medical advances took centuries of careful research. Humans had defeated a designer bioweapon in 6 days. The Council decided that conventional warfare would be necessary after all. 600 warships assembled at the edge of human space. It was the largest fleet the Confederation had deployed in 3,000 years. They intended to overwhelm humanity through sheer numbers. Every colony would be bombarded from orbit. Every ship would be hunted down. Every last human would be eliminated. Admiral Eth was not given command of this fleet. He had failed once already. Instead, the Council appointed Supreme Commander S, a military leader who had never lost a battle in his 400 years of service. S believed in thorough planning and overwhelming force. He would not make the same mistakes Eth had made. The fleet entered human space and began its campaign of destruction. Colony after colony fell to orbital bombardment. Human settlements were reduced to glass and ash. The death toll climbed into the hundreds of millions. Humanity fought back, but their forces were scattered and outnumbered. Their ships were destroyed whenever they tried to engage the Confederation fleet. Their ground forces were overwhelmed by superior numbers. It seemed that the extermination would succeed after all. Admiral Ben Harper commanded the Earth Defense Fleet. He had 32 ships under his command. 32 ships against 600. By every calculation, by every strategic model, by every reasonable measure, he was going to lose. But Ben Harper had studied human history. He knew stories that the Confederation had never heard. He knew about 300 warriors who held a mountain pass against an army of millions. He knew about cities that refused to surrender even when surrounded and starving. He knew that humans had never measured victory by the odds against them. Ben led the Confederation fleet on a chase through the outer solar system. He made them follow him past Mars and through the asteroid belt. He made them think he was running away, looking for a place to hide. He was not hiding. He was leading them into a trap. The debris field near Jupiter was a graveyard of ancient ships and broken asteroids. Gravity wells pulled in unpredictable directions. Sensor systems became unreliable. The Confederation fleet had to slow down and spread out to navigate safely. That was when Ben attacked. His ships emerged from hiding places within the debris. Human Marines launched boarding pods at enemy vessels. They crashed through airlocks and fought their way inside. They carried rifles and grenades and knives. They were ready to die. The Eye had evolved beyond physical violence. They had not fought hand-to-hand in thousands of years. Their soldiers were trained to operate weapons systems, not to wrestle with enemies in dark corridors. They did not know how to handle an opponent who was willing to bite and claw and fight with bare hands if necessary. Humans did. The Battle of Jupiter lasted for 18 hours. When it was over, the Confederation had lost 400 ships. Their Supreme Commander S was dead, killed when human Marines stormed his bridge. The survivors retreated in disorder, unable to believe what had happened. Ben Harper broadcast a message to the Galactic Council. His face was covered in blood and his voice was hoarse from shouting orders. But his words were clear. We are not a protected species. We are not prey. We are not going to die. Send your next fleet and we will teach them the same lesson. Send 1,000 fleets and we will destroy them all. You started this war, but we are going to finish it. And when we do, you will remember that humanity does not surrender. Humanity does not give up. Humanity survives. The Council did not respond. They were too busy trying to understand how everything had gone so wrong. They had tried disease. Humans had cured it. They had tried overwhelming force. Humans had defeated it. They had expected submission. Humans had given them defiance. The human problem was not getting smaller. It was growing. And the galaxy was beginning to realize that there might not be a solution at all. 5 years had passed since the Battle of Jupiter. The Confederation had tried everything they could imagine to destroy humanity. Nothing had worked. The human problem had become an obsession that consumed the Council's every waking moment. After the failure of their military campaigns, the Council turned to more subtle methods. If they could not defeat humanity through open warfare, perhaps they could eliminate their leadership through assassination. Without commanders and scientists and politicians, human society would collapse into chaos. The survivors would be easy to control. The Syndicate had existed for 8,000 years. They were not soldiers or warriors. They were artists of death. Their assassins could infiltrate any security system, bypass any protection, and eliminate any target. They had never failed a contract in their entire history. The Council offered them more wealth than most planets produced in a century. The Syndicate accepted. 12 of their best operatives were sent to Earth. Each one had killed hundreds of targets across their careers. Each one was a master of disguise, poison, and silent violence. They entered human space through hidden routes and made their way to the surface without detection. 3 of them were captured within 6 hours of landing. Humans had developed detection methods that the Syndicate had never encountered. Security systems tracked biological signatures that could not be faked. Surveillance networks covered every corner of every city. The 3 assassins were identified the moment they stepped off their transport and taken into custody before they could reach their targets. 2 more were killed by ordinary citizens. A retired schoolteacher named Maria was watering her garden when she noticed a stranger trying to break into her neighbor's house. She recognized the unusual movement patterns from news reports about the alien assassins. She went inside, loaded her late husband's hunting rifle, and shot the assassin through the kitchen window. The other was killed by a construction worker who hit him with a pipe wrench when the assassin made the mistake of asking for directions to a government building. The remaining 7 were hunted down by a security team led by Agent Tran, was 34 years old with sharp eyes and a sharper mind. She had spent 10 years studying alien behavior and movement patterns. She knew how each Confederation species walked, talked, and thought. They moved like predators. They were graceful and efficient, never wasting a single motion. But they were also predictable. They followed optimal paths. They made logical decisions. They did not understand improvisation. Set traps that exploited this weakness. She created situations with no optimal solution. She forced the assassins to make quick decisions in confusing environments. One by one, she tracked them down. One by one, she ended them. When asked how she had defeated the greatest assassins in galactic history, simply shrugged. They moved too predictably, she explained. They did not know how to adapt when things went wrong. Humans spent their entire lives dealing with things going wrong. It was practically a natural talent. The Syndicate dissolved rather than face further humiliation. 8,000 years of perfect success had ended against a species that had only been in space for a few generations. The Council tried economic isolation next. They declared that any species caught trading with humans would face severe penalties. All commerce with human space was banned. All resources were cut off. All diplomatic channels were closed. The Council expected humanity to starve. They expected human colonies to wither and die without access to galactic markets. They expected desperation to drive humans to surrender. Instead, humans adapted. Human scientists developed new technologies to produce resources locally. Human engineers designed ships that could travel further and faster on less fuel. Human traders made contact with species that the Confederation had oppressed and exploited for centuries. There were a reptilian species that had been conquered by the Confederation 3,000 years ago. They served as laborers and servants, forbidden from owning property or traveling freely. When human traders offered them partnership instead of subjugation, they accepted immediately. The Chorus were a collective species that communicated through song. The Confederation had silenced them, banning their music and forcing them to use written language that felt unnatural and painful. Humans learned their songs and sang with them. The chorus wept with joy at being heard again. The Ironborn were a mechanical species created by an extinct civilization. The Confederation considered them property, things to be used rather than people to be respected. Humans recognized them as fellow intelligent beings and offered them equal standing in the new alliance. Within 3 years, a rival economic bloc had formed. Human space became a haven for refugees and outcasts from across the galaxy. Species that had lived under Confederation rule for now traded freely with humanity. The economic isolation had not weakened humans, it had given them allies. Commander Laura led the liberation of Chorus Prime. She commanded a mixed fleet of human cruisers, destroyers, and ironborn frigates. The Confederation garrison on Chorus Prime had held the planet for 900 years. They had 20,000 soldiers and orbital defense platforms that could destroy entire fleets. Laura had 3,000 soldiers and 12 ships. She should have lost. But Laura understood something the Confederation did not. She was not just fighting to defeat an enemy. She was fighting to free people who had been waiting for freedom for nearly a millennium. She broadcast a message to the surface before the battle began. She spoke in the singing language of the chorus, words she had spent months learning. She told them that help had arrived. She told them that their silence was ending. She asked them to rise. The chorus remembered how to fight. They had been forbidden from violence for 900 years, but the knowledge had never truly left them. When Laura's forces attacked from above, the chorus attacked from below. Confederation soldiers found themselves surrounded by enemies who knew every tunnel and every shadow on their own world. The garrison fell in 11 days. 900 years of occupation ended in less than 2 weeks. Laura stood in the ruins of the garrison command center as chorus civilians emerged from their homes for the first time as free people. A child approached her, a small creature with 6 arms and scales that shimmered like rainbows. The child had been told all its life that humans were monsters, destroyers, demons from the void. The child asked Laura if humans were really as frightening as the Confederation claimed. Laura knelt down so she could look the child in its many eyes. She extended her hand, palm open, fingers spread. She spoke softly in the chorus language. "We are only frightening to those who hurt the people we protect," she said. "To everyone else, we are friends." The child took her hand. Someone captured the moment in a photograph. The image spread across the galaxy within hours. A human warrior kneeling before an alien child, a hand offered in friendship, a promise kept. The Confederation had spent years telling the galaxy that humans were dangerous animals that needed to be exterminated for the safety of all civilization. They had broadcast propaganda showing human violence and human aggression and human destruction. But this single image was more powerful than all their propaganda combined. It showed a different truth. Humans were not monsters. They were protectors. They were liberators. They were friends to those who had no friends. More species began to reach out to humanity. More refugees fled to human space. More alliances were formed. More voices joined the chorus calling for freedom. The Confederation had tried to isolate humanity, and instead had given them the most powerful weapon in the galaxy. Hope. And hope, as the Council was learning, could not be killed no matter how hard they tried. The Confederation's Strategic Intelligence Division had spent years trying to understand humanity. They had analyzed every battle, every negotiation, every interaction between humans and other species. They had compiled their findings into a report that ran to 12,000 pages. The conclusion troubled everyone who read it. Humans possessed a psychological trait that had no equivalent in any other known species. The analysts struggled to find a word for it in the Confederation's language. The closest translation was something like joyful self-destruction in the face of impossible odds, but even that did not capture the full meaning. Humans called it spite. The report explained that most species in the galaxy behaved according to rational self-interest. When faced with certain defeat, they surrendered. When survival was clearly impossible, they accepted death with dignity and tried to negotiate favorable terms for their descendants. This was logical. This was reasonable. This was how civilized beings behaved. Humans did not behave this way. When told they could not win, humans became more determined to win. When pushed to the edge of extinction, humans became more creative and more dangerous. When given the choice between submission and destruction, humans chose a third option that no other species had ever considered. They chose to make their enemies regret starting the fight. Dr. Price was a physicist who had lost his entire family during the Gray Plague. His wife had died in his arms. His 2 children had died in a hospital where the medical staff were too overwhelmed to save them. He had watched the light leave their eyes and felt something inside himself change forever. By every measure should have been broken. He should have given up. He should have spent his remaining years in grief and despair. Instead, he built a weapon, disappeared into a hidden research facility on a moon that did not officially exist. He surrounded himself with other scientists who had lost everything to the Confederation. They worked together in secret for 4 years, driven by a shared purpose that went beyond survival. They called their creation the Echo Drive. It was not a weapon in the traditional sense. It did not fire projectiles or energy beams. It did not explode. It did something far worse. The Echo Drive could destabilize the fabric of spacetime itself. When activated, it created a cascade reaction that spread outward at the speed of light. Everything caught in the wave was torn apart at the subatomic level. Stars collapsed. Planets shattered. Nothing survived. Did not create the Echo Drive to win the war. He created it as a final option. If humanity was truly facing extinction, if the Confederation succeeded in killing every last human being, then the Echo Drive would ensure that victory came at an unacceptable cost. The device was placed in a secure facility deep within human space. Its activation codes were distributed among 100 different individuals who did not know each other's identities. If humanity fell, the Echo Drive would fire automatically. The Confederation would inherit nothing but an empty galaxy. When the Council learned of the Echo Drive's existence, they did not believe it at first. The technology seemed impossible. No species in galactic history had ever developed something so destructive. But their intelligence analysts confirmed the reports. The Echo Drive was real. The humans had built a doomsday device that could destroy everything, including themselves, rather than allow the Confederation to win. The Council convened an emergency session that lasted 6 days. Representatives argued and debated and calculated. They ran simulations and consulted experts. They tried to find a way to neutralize the threat. There was no way. A strike against human space might destroy the Echo Drive, but it might also trigger its activation. The odds were too uncertain. The risk was too great. Even a small chance of galactic destruction was unacceptable. The I representative was the first to admit defeat. His people had started this war. They had called for humanity's extermination. Now he stood before the Council and spoke words that no eye had spoken in 10,000 years. He recommended surrender. Not negotiation, not compromise. Surrender. Complete and unconditional acceptance that the Confederation could not win. The other representatives were shocked. The representative, newly appointed after the syndicate's collapse, spoke next. His people had tried to assassinate human leaders and failed. He agreed with the I. Surrender was the only option. One by one, the representatives added their voices. The species that had voted unanimously for human extinction now voted unanimously for peace. The war was over. Humanity had won. But one question remained unanswered. How had this happened? How had a primitive species from a death world defeated the greatest civilization in galactic history? Chairman N, the ancient I who had led the council for 300 years, addressed the assembly one final time. His voice was old and tired, but his words carried the weight of revelation. "We calculated wrong," he said. "We measured humanity by the standards we use for every other species. We counted their ships and their soldiers and their resources. We evaluated their technology and their infrastructure. We determined that they were weak and would fall easily. But we forgot to account for something we did not understand. We forgot to measure their will." He paused, his four eyes scanning the chamber. "Humans do not surrender when they are losing. They fight harder. Humans do not accept death when it comes for them. They rage against it. Humans do not behave rationally when pushed to their limits. They become something else entirely. They become unstoppable." N sat down heavily. He had ruled the galaxy for 3 centuries. He had overseen the conquest of 100 worlds. He had believed that power came from ships and weapons and economic control. He had been wrong. Power came from the willingness to sacrifice everything for what you believed in. Power came from refusing to stop even when stopping was the only logical choice. Power came from spite and stubbornness, and the absolute refusal to let your enemies win. Humans had this power in abundance. The Confederation did not. The vote for peace was unanimous, but it was not celebrated. The representatives left the chamber in silence, each one carrying the weight of their failure. They had tried to exterminate a species and had instead created a force that could destroy the galaxy. The human problem had not been solved. It had evolved into something far more dangerous. And now the Confederation had to find a way to live with it. Price watched the council's announcement from his hidden facility. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He simply turned off the monitor and walked to the window that looked out over the barren moon. He thought about his wife and his children. He thought about the millions who had died. He thought about the weapon he had built and what it said about humanity that such a thing was necessary. "We are survivors," he thought. "We will do whatever it takes to keep surviving, even if it means becoming something terrible." He hoped they would never have to use the Echo Drive. He hoped peace would last. He hoped that humanity could find a better path. But if the Confederation ever broke the peace, if they ever tried to finish what they started, knew that humanity would be ready. They would always be ready. Because that was what it meant to be human. The Treaty of Saul was signed on the 23rd anniversary of First Contact. The ceremony took place in the same council chamber where humanity had been declared a protected species all those years ago. The same high ceiling, the same ancient symbols on the walls, the same representatives watching from their seats. But everything else had changed. Ambassador Grace represented humanity at the ceremony. She was 62 years old with silver hair and steady hands. She had spent her entire adult life working toward this moment. She had lost friends in the Gray Plague. She had lost colleagues in the battles that followed. She carried their memory with her as she walked to the podium. Grace stood where Jake had stood 23 years earlier. She remembered his stories about that first meeting, how the council had looked down at humanity with pity and contempt, how they had decided to confine humans to their solar system like animals in a cage. Now those same council members looked at her with something very different in their eyes: respect, fear, and perhaps the beginning of hope. The treaty was complex, hundreds of pages dealing with borders and trade routes and diplomatic protocols, but the core was simple. Humanity would be recognized as a sovereign power. The Confederation would cease all hostile actions. Both sides would work together to face common threats. There was one final clause that historians would debate for centuries: the mutual defense provision. The galaxy had dangers beyond the Confederation and humanity. Ancient machines drifted in the void between stars, remnants of civilizations that had died before Earth's sun was born. Hostile entities watched from outside known space, waiting for weakness. Cosmic phenomena threatened all life regardless of species or politics. The Confederation had faced these threats alone for 12,000 years. They had lost ships and soldiers and entire worlds. They had survived, but barely. The mutual defense provision changed everything. Human ships would now patrol alongside Confederation vessels. Human soldiers would stand beside alien marines. Human ingenuity would be directed outward, toward the darkness, instead of inward, toward revenge. Grace signed the treaty with a pen that had belonged to her grandfather. He had been a diplomat too, back on Earth, before first contact. He had taught her that the greatest victories came not from defeating your enemies, but from turning them into friends. She hoped he would have been proud. Admiral Ben Harper attended the ceremony as an observer. He was 68 now, gray-haired, and from battles that most people only read about in history books. He had commanded the defense of Earth. He had led the charge at Jupiter. He had become a legend without ever wanting to be one. Sitting beside him was Admiral Eth, the only survivor of that first battle at 442b. They had been enemies once. Eth had tried to force humanity into submission. Ben had made him watch his fleet burn. By all logic, they should have hated each other until the day they died. Instead, they had become friends. It started with secret messages during the war. Eth had reached out through back channels, trying to understand the species that had humiliated him. Ben had responded out of curiosity. Their correspondence had continued for years, hidden from both governments. They had discovered that they had more in common than either had expected. Now they sat together as the treaty was signed, two old soldiers watching the birth of a new era. "Do you understand now?" Ben asked quietly. Eth considered the question for a long moment. His 4 eyes blinked slowly as he chose his words. "I understand that we were fools," he said. "We saw a species that had evolved on a death world and assumed they were weak. We thought that surviving such a hostile environment would make them fragile. We did not realize the opposite was true." "That is part of it," Ben agreed, "but there is more." He gestured toward the crowd filling the chamber. Laura was speaking with chorus delegates, her words accompanied by the musical harmonies that had once been forbidden. Price was shaking hands with a scientist, discussing research projects that would benefit both species. The daughter of, the woman who had rammed her cargo hauler into Eth's flagship, was accepting a medal on her mother's behalf. "We do not just survive," Ben said. "We connect. We adapt. We make friends in the strangest places. You tried to kill us and we responded by building alliances with everyone you had oppressed. You isolated us and we built our own civilization. You pushed and we pushed back harder. But we also reached out. We also offered our hands." Eth was quiet for a long time. "The human problem," he said finally. "That is what they called it in our military academies. The unsolvable equation. No matter how many variables we adjusted, the outcome was always the same: human victory." Ben smiled. "And what did your strategists conclude?" "That there was no conventional solution," Eth admitted. "Humans could not be defeated through force or disease or economic pressure. Every attack made them stronger. Every atrocity united them further. Every apparent victory only deepened their resolve." He paused. "Some suggested that the only solution was complete annihilation. Destroy every human, every colony, every ship. Leave nothing behind." "We had an answer for that too," Ben said. "You know about the Echo Drive?" "Yes," Eth made a sound that might have been a sigh. "The ultimate expression of human spite. If you could not survive, you would ensure that no one else survived either." Ben nodded. "That is who we are. We would rather destroy everything than let someone else win. It is not rational, it is not logical, but it is truth." "Then how does this end?" Eth asked. "How does the galaxy live with a species that cannot be killed and will not surrender?" Ben rose from his seat as the ceremony concluded. He stretched his old bones and looked up at the viewing ports that showed human and Confederation ships flying in formation together for the first time. "You stop trying to kill us," he said simply. "You stop treating us as a problem to be solved. You accept that we are here and that we are not going away. And then you discover something wonderful." "What is that?" "That the same traits that make us impossible to destroy also make us the best friends you could ever have. We are loyal beyond reason. We protect those we care about with everything we have. We never give up on the people we love." He extended his hand to Eth. It was the same gesture Jake had offered at first contact. It was the same gesture Laura had offered to a frightened child on Chorus Prime. It was the most human gesture there was. "Welcome to the Alliance," Ben said. "Try not to start any more wars with us." Eth took his hand. His grip was awkward. His species had not evolved for handshakes, but he held on tightly, and something passed between them that did not need words. "I have learned my lesson," Eth said. "The galaxy cannot kill humanity. Better to have them as friends than as enemies." Above them, the first joint patrol prepared to launch into the unknown reaches of space. Human pilots sat beside alien navigators. Human marines stood beside warriors and iron-born soldiers. The daughter of commanded a ship named in her mother's honor, leading a mixed crew into the darkness beyond known space. The galaxy had tried to solve the human problem through extermination. They had failed completely. They had spent 23 years and countless lives learning a lesson that could have been taught in a single conversation. Humans were not a problem. Humans were a gift. And now the galaxy was ready to receive it. Grace finished signing the treaty and stepped back from the podium. She looked out at the assembled delegates, at the old enemies becoming new friends, at the beginning of something that might last for 10,000 years. She thought about all the humans who had died to make this moment possible. She thought about the ones who were still fighting, still building, still hopping. She thought about the generations yet to come, the ones who would inherit this alliance and carry it forward into the future. "We made it," she thought. "Against all odds, against everything they threw at us, we made it." Outside the viewing ports, the joint fleet began its journey into the unknown. Human and alien ships flying together. Human and alien crews working side by side. Human and alien futures intertwined. The human problem had finally been solved. Not through death. Through partnership. And that made all the difference.